Welcome back. You're watching Trade of the Week. Today we bring you a technical analysis of Remgro, Growthpoint and Telkom. Petri Redelinghuys, founder of Herenya Capital, joins us now with that analysis. Thank you so much for your time, Petri. Petri, I actually haven't seen you in a while.
Yeah, we had an election break, I think.
Yes, yeah. Exactly. A GNU break.
Yes.
And I'm wondering if anything has changed in terms of how you're positioning yourself, particularly even with the developments of the cabinet.
Okay, so I think this is maybe a good opportunity to sort of segue into what would have been our educational section slot at the end of the show.
Yeah.
Maybe a good time to do it now.
Uh-huh.
But essentially, I think the premise is, why do you mix technical analysis with fundamental analysis? Why is it important, and when is it more important to listen to which, right?
Yes.
I think so. Essentially, yes, things have changed. From the perspective of at least from a fundamental perspective or from a risk perspective, I think we saw on the channel just before this, there was an interview with somebody talking about how the markets are receiving the election outcome.
Yes.
And that, for example, very positively is the answer. We see the rand firming up. We see
more
markets
liquidity
really
coming
rallying.
into the JSE.
Ton of volume being traded, that kind of thing. And that kind of shows the power of sentiment, number one, and why fundamentals are important. So the outcome with the GNU is, for all intents and purposes, the best possible outcome that we could have hoped for, right? And I think there's a couple of reasons for that. One is it sort of indicates towards policy stability. It gives the opposition and other parties an opportunity to participate in cabinet.
Yeah.
And let's be honest, with the track record that we have, at least that our government has, the fewer parties, trust each other. Being forced to interact with each other is good, because everybody's going to be watching over each other's backs, if you will.
Yeah.
So that is going to be, I think, a very good essentially situation for running a slightly, well, at least it's perceived from the outside, and I think the previous guest also spoke a lot about how we are a small piece of a big global economy, so international perception of how our country is being run is very important.
Yeah.
And seeing that from the outside, how the perception around us changes to a positive one is very good.
True.
So that's going to have an impact on things that we know are very sensitive to international perception. So banks, for example, the sort of industrial resources, SA Inc. companies are going to do very well on the back of that, because, like we've said 1,000 times on the show before, our companies, our stocks are trading at really good multiples and are really good value for money things. We're just not attractive to international investors. Now that we are slightly more attractive, and that we have this transition period where we've gone through, obviously there was the apartheid government, then the post-apartheid government, which was very exciting at the time, and over a space of 3 decades kind of deteriorated into what it was not so long ago. This is the next sort of watershed moment for us, where we could potentially see another turning point where, okay, now in the the post-apartheid hype is over. Let's get down to business and actually fix things, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's a very good space for us to be in, and that's going to be very rewarding for some of the retail stocks, for the REITs, at least retail property stocks, or real estate investment trust stocks, some of the retail stocks, some of the banking stocks. I think these are going to do really well going forward, and that's why the fundamental picture is important, because that is going to lead to fundamental flows, people making long-term investment decisions, irrespective of what the chart looks like. They are going to be buying. So you'd be doing yourself
a disservice if you just look at the technical picture in isolation without the fundamentals.
Often there are times where you look at the technical picture and you think, well, something's got to give here, and then some sort of a fundamental event occurs, which then triggers the technical move or change.
Okay.
So that's obviously fantastic, or that happens quite regularly, but primarily the market is driven by sentiment and what people believe about the future. If we believe that there's opportunity, if we believe that today's price is a good price for something, for 10 years from now, I'm going to buy it today, right? And that really is how the pricing mechanism behind the markets work. We are interacting over the price of, that newspaper, because we believe that it provides us with value. And it's going to continue to provide us with value in the future. And therefore, that's what drives price, right? If I believe in the future that skin is going to be worth a lot more, I'm willing to pay you more for it today. And that's
brings in that element of a forward-looking market.
Yes, exactly.
Well.
So I think from that perspective, the outcome is fantastic, and I think that's why fundamentals are very important. So, for example, if you look at one of the stocks we'll be looking at today, on some of them there aren't exactly the world's greatest setups, but if you look at what the potential is over the next 5 years, given the next 4 to 5 years, given the situation with government at the moment and the changes that are going to take place, we're well positioned, I think, to see good returns on those stocks. Yeah.
All right. Well, let's us get into those stocks.
Unfortunately, I'm having some technical issues connecting to your network, so let me see if I can figure out what to do here.
No, we'll get to those as well, because I think it's also quite interesting that these counters have a lot of the fundamental sentiment attached to them as well. I think we
can have a bit of a discussion around them. I think for the lack of the unfortunately, I'm having some trouble connecting to your Wi-Fi.
Let's actually start off with Telkom.
Yes.
And it's been quite interesting because the telecom sector has actually been so under pressure.
It has.
Over the last while. And of course, we even know the fundamental challenges that Telkom has faced, but also some of the kind of opportunities that they've capitalized on with some of the kind of strategy revamp and asset disposals.
Yeah, so I mean, we know it's been a long story of a restructuring. We know that there were a bunch of once-offs that came through. I think we've spoken about it maybe a month or two ago.
Yeah.
Some impairments that are now off the book, and finally they're going to be able to start paying dividends and all those things as well. So that's fantastic. There's also the Ministry of Digital Communications and whatever the ministry's names are these days, has gone to an opposition leader. So that is, at least in our book, and I hate the politics side of things, but unfortunately we have to.
It has to come in. It has to come in.
But it is, I think, a very strong positive, at least from our perspective, right?
Yeah.
And I think that if we start seeing, I mean, we know historically just industry-wide, Telkom, MTN, Vodacom, all of these companies have had challenges with spectrum and this and that, and there's always been a lot of stuff. And yes, to some extent we've been quite defensive. For example, our government hasn't yet allowed SpaceX to enter into our market.
Yes. It's a very regulatory heavy space, because even looking at what Nigeria, for example, experiences in Nigeria from time to time.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, MTN in that space, let's just talk about that. They help write the rules and then they break the rules.
Yeah.
So that's not always the best situation. But I think from that sort of governance perspective and from the regulatory perspective and the ministry perspective, the fact that that's now gone to a more, I want to call it, pro-business party, I think that bodes well for the sector as a whole. And in that sector, you have to start thinking, well, who's the best pick?
Yeah.
So Vodacom is quite a defensive pick, MTN is quite a defensive pick, but you always have that, potential landmines in Africa to step on.
Yeah.
Telkom could potentially be like a takeout target at some point. We've seen that they've started restructuring. We've seen that they've let go of non-core assets, things that they want to.
Well, that's something I haven't thought about since their MTN. Kind of potential deal, and even the one with Sipho Maseko's company, former CEO.
So there's potential for some deal making on the table here. So you get that. Look, it's not a guarantee that it's going to happen, but it's a potential, right?
Starting to look.
So there's a bit of a call option there that you may or may not be able to, win big on. But also there's upcoming cash flow in future. If you don't mind bringing that Bloomberg chart back up that you had on a second ago, if you look at the a chart that's sort of trading around the low off a bit of a support level, it's managed to make what's called like a higher low from a trending perspective.
Well, let's actually take a look at that. Maybe we can use that as well to our advantage.
I apologize for the technical. I'll try.
Technical difficulties while we're looking into technicals.
Technical stocks. The irony. But essentially that's been trading in a bit of a range over the last couple of weeks. And yes, there's not the greatest sort of technical setup for it. But if you are a longer term investor, it's kind of dancing around the 200-day moving average, if I'm not mistaken. So I think if you are a slightly longer term investor, it's a good place to maybe take about a 5-year sort of view on that. So if you have a look at that chart, for example, you'll see it got to around 22 Rand as a support. It's traded down. It's about the 24 Rand sector area at the moment, and it's not managed to go below that 22 level again. So that is acting as a bit of a support, I think, and we're kind of setting up to maybe for a move back up to that 30 rand, potentially even 32 rand as a target in the short term. And if you give me just a moment, it seems my internet has come back, although it is very slow.
Okay, so definitely maybe an opportunity there?
Yeah, so I think we like this as a buy, essentially, and we would probably put a stop loss sort of below 22 rand. And just a note, that chart is quoted in cents, so it says 2,000.
Yeah.
It's 2,200 cents. So sort of below 22 rand would be a stop loss, and around the 30 rand level would be a take profit. That would be the short-term play on that stock. If you are a bit more patient and you are a longer-term investor, you look forward to getting some dividends from it. And I think that's going to do relatively well in future.
All right.
So yeah, so that is something, and it seems that my charts are coming back. They're just very, very slow.
Yeah.
So
okay, lovely. It's fine. I mean, we're getting the gist of the kind of trades that you are seeing there. Growthpoint. Of course, Growthpoint, quite a diverse player there, but also still, heavily exposed to the South African macroeconomic environment, but also, I mean, the high interest rates that these REITs are still
battling,
dealing with.
Look, so I think that if you are in a position to buy a property today, buy a property today, because I don't think that interest rate. We've been saying this the whole year, right? Interest rates are going to come down. Interest rates at some point will come down.
Yes.
So floating interest rate. So that as the interest rate comes down, you benefit, right? So that's a very good, and then obviously property prices react positively on the back of that. So that I think is a good omen for the property sector in general. So the REITs will sort of re-rate, I guess, or readjust pricing based on interest rate cycle sort of coming down again. From there, well, that's one sort of side of the coin. The other side of the coin is, again, the GNU situation. There's a very pro-business thing, and somebody, I'll give credit where it's due, JD Breitenbach of Easy Equities was making some comments earlier today, talking about, if you look at just a sector like agriculture, for example.
Yes.
If you can get, and that also now has gone to a ministry that ministry has gone to one of the opposition leaders, right? So that is an area of the economy where very little change can have an enormous impact on employment, on GDP. I think it's like 4.5% of GDP, if I'm not mistaken. You could essentially almost double that contribution in a very short period of time. You can create thousands of jobs if you just sort out that ministry and do things right, if you will. And that, for example, has an enormous knock-on effect on the rest of the economy. And that boosts property prices, boosts retail turnover. All these things are good for the REITs or for the real estate investment trusts. These kinds are exposed to retail property, they're exposed to commercial property, they're exposed to residential property. So Growthpoint has run already, and you might feel that you might have missed it. Sorry, we're looking at Remgro here. So as you can see, the internet is super slow here, so it hasn't yet let me change the chart, but at least we can see Remgro. We'll get back to Remgro in a second. I don't know if you can maybe pull up the
let's pull out the chart.
The Growthpoint chart, the Bloomberg one. There you go. So if you have a look at that, if it's not as clear there because we don't have candlesticks, but it looks like we've got a little candle, a little bull flag formation. If you look at that low that was made just after the April marker, that's a little flag post up into the high of around, what is it, 12.63 rand. And from there, see if I can pull up this chart. And then from there, that was a very, very strong push that it had from around that sort of 12 rand mark to 12.63 rand, where it is now on the, today, essentially on the back of the GNU announcement over the weekend. But from here, I think that there's quite a bit more upside. I mean, you could essentially measure that flagpole into that. So you'd say from, say, 10.50 rand to 12.50 rand, that's a 2 rand move. Project that out from 12 rand. So you're looking at 4 rand. 14.50 rand as a target price, and my chart is back, so you can maybe switch over to this one if you like.
Okay, lovely.
Thank you guys for your patience, man. But all right, so here's that sort of move into the formation, and you can say that there we have a little flagpole situation happening. Let's do that, and we just copy it over there, and then we've got our little bull flag situation happening over here. that you can then essentially project out as your target price.
Okay.
And we're looking at, so that's sort of a relatively conservative target price for this. And if you look back in a bit more history, you can see, well, this 10 Rand 73 level is quite significant. We've now made essentially 2 higher lows. So we've got some higher highs and higher lows, 2 higher highs and 2 higher lows. So we can say that from a longer term perspective, the trend may well be changing. And yes, it's, the horse has kind of bolted out the stable here a little bit, but I think that there's quite a bit more upside to be had in this stock. And once we start seeing the bigger institutional investors coming to market, the offshore guys coming in, seeing the same opportunities, understanding that if we see significant economic growth, significant changes in employment, those types of things are going to have a knock-on effect on property prices all throughout. We start seeing interest rate cutting cycle, the property prices are definitely going to run. So I think we're well positioned to start taking advantage of this sector at this time.
Okay. Well, what about our investment holding company, Remgro? This one seems to be one that is not going anywhere. I remember there was a time when people were nervous about investment holding companies, but a lot of people are still quite keen on Remgro.
Yeah, well, they've got a very diversified portfolio, right? And there's some telecommunication stuff in there that they could potentially unbundle and offload to someone like Vodacom. So that's potentially an option as well. And as you can see, post the election, there was quite a big rally that's taken place. Leading into April, it was quite a tough time for Remgro. But post that, it's rallied quite a bit. And I think that, looking at a very diversified portfolio of companies that they hold within their stable, if you will, I think it's one of those companies also that's quite well positioned to grow, in the sort of next 2 to 5 years. Again, this is not one of those companies that is going to really shoot the lights out in the short term, but in the medium term, it's going to look better. So if you have a look at the chart, the only chart that worked earlier, we can finally have a look at it. I think we pointed it out on the show a couple of weeks ago. Well, in May, there was this inverse head and shoulders formation on it, and we had targeted 137 Rand 50 around there. It went and it's basically smashed through that target. It's trading 143 now and has managed to sort of get back above the 200-day moving average. So we think this bounce probably continues to around 160 Rand a share. But over the longer term, it could probably continue to trend up. As you can see by the chart, it's essentially been going sideways for the last number of years. From here, if we start seeing a bit of an upward trend again and favorable economic environment for it, I think it's going to do really well. But for now, for those who missed this inverse head and shoulders, you could probably sort of enter the trade here. You might want to stop loss around this 132 Rand. So it's about a 10 Rand risk that you're taking for about a 20 Rand reward at 164, 160 Rand take profit. So it's no longer the highest probability trade, but still we think a relatively good trade if you're patient enough to wait 2 to 3 months for it to work out.
Well, thank you so much for your time and giving us insight on these opportunities that you are seeing there on the JSE. That was founder of Herenya Capital, Petri Redelinghuys.